Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please remain standing. I'd like to invite Laura Bollinger. She's pastor at Christ United Methodist Church, to give the invocation.
Thank you, and thank you, Council, for the privilege of opening this assembly in prayer. Will you bow your heads with me in prayer? Eternal God, we come to you this evening, placing in your hands the needs of our city, asking you to give us wisdom and ability and sane judgment, moral purpose to these our leaders who govern us. I know, Lord, that the task is difficult, the duties are many, and the responsibilities heavy. I pray for them that you would support them with your might, that crime and lawlessness be controlled and righteousness and integrity prevail. Thank you for their willingness to officially give of themselves in this way. Make us law-abiding citizens and a people who seek the welfare of the community, that the good news may spread throughout the land. Lord, we ask that you help our officials to dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to you and to their tasks and the assignments that you have entrusted to them. Also, keep us mindful of those who have suffered due to the heinous terrorist acts on this day, September 11, in the year 2001. And keep us, most merciful Lord, from further evil by your gracious hand of protection. For it's in the precious name of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you. I'll now call to order the City Council meeting, September 11th, 2017. Thank you. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Here.
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 Thank you very much. There are no changes to the agenda, so with that, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. I'd entertain to approve the minutes of August 28th, 2017.
So moved.
I have a motion by Cindy Spiljerik, second by Steve Hoover. All those that want to approve the minutes as stated, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Minutes approved, 7-0. Moving on to claims. Got a chance to review those. Is there a motion to approve claims as stated?
So moved.
I have a motion by Dr. Keene. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Bob Horke. All those in favor of approving claims signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries 7-0. Thank you. Tonight gives me great pleasure to call Todd Bertrand up to the microphone tonight to honor one of our very own, Chief Mike Shirley, and his retirement.
Members of council, tonight we take a moment out of your normal course of business as a servant to this community for in total 43 years. Mike Shirley, as a somewhat younger man, decided to volunteer his time starting in, I believe, 1974. Is that correct? 1974, as a young man, answering the call of help across this very known as Westfield. And then in the early 80s, I believe 1981, is that correct? 1980, he decided to do this as a career. And so his last day serving this community in that stead was this past July, culminating in a total of 43 years of giving service, taking time on and off the clock, leaving his home and his wife and 2 small children at the time, answering his neighbor's call for help. I think it's fitting that this elected body and this public chamber take just a moment and recognize Mike and all his efforts for a very well-deserved recognition of a long and very loyal career to this community and the changes he's seen over time. I know firsthand he's not always embraced those, but he's accepted them. And so, and I can tell you that on that back row with Gary Sutherland and Bob Smith and Mike Shirley, you have a collected sum total of nearly 100 years of service sitting there that have served this community. And so take special note. And by that virtue, without further ado, I'd like to call Mike Shirley forward and give him a token of our that pales in comparison of he's dedicated to this community. He's not one to stand in front of crowds.
Speech.
Thank you, Mike, from all of us in the grateful community for all these years. Moving on, we'll start with old business, and we'll take a look at ordinance 1722, the Bridgewater PUD District Amendment, up for adoption.
Good evening, members of the council. For the record, Dane Crabtree with the Economic and Community Development Department. For you is Ordinance 2, a proposed amendment to the Bridgewater PUD ordinance specific to the Radrick Building property, which is located at the northwest corner of Gray Road and Radrick Drive. The amendment would modify wall sign standards established in a prior amendment specific to the Radrick property and would require future signage on the property to follow current UDO standards. This proposal was introduced at the August 14th, 2017 City Council meeting and receives its public hearing at the September 5th, 2017 Advisory Plan Commission meeting, where it received no comments and has been forwarded with a unanimous favorable recommendation. The proposed amendment has been approved by the Bridgewater Master Owners Association's Architectural Review Board. The owner of the property, Dr. Justin Gilmore, is present this evening. He does not intend to make a presentation, but is available for any questions you may have, and I am available if the Plan Commission, or excuse me, if the City Council has any questions of the department. Thank you.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for the petitioner? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion.
Motion to approve ordinance 17-22, Bridgewater PUD District Amendment.
Okay, I have a motion by Steve Hoover,
Second.
and a second by Bob Horke. Any council discussion? Hearing none, will you call the roll, please?
Yes.
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 All right, thank you. The next item under old business is ordinance 1724, Chatham Hills Planned Unit Development Amendment for Mr. Skelton.
Good evening, oh, wow, that's sorry, that's loud. Good evening, members of the council. This evening before you is an amendment to the Chatham Hills Planned Unit Development. It's approximately 14.84 acres, just incorporating into the already existing PUD. No new units are proposed, it's just incorporating additional land area as reflected on the exhibit on the screen. That it's really that simple. The Plan Commission dealt with this in a single meeting. There was no real comment. So if there's any questions of me, I'm happy to try to respond.
All right. Councilors, any questions for Mr. Skelton? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I'd move that we approve
Chatham Hills PUD District 4, 1709 PUD-18.
All right. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second from Cindy Spoljarek. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All right, thank you. The next item on the agenda is ordinance 17-29, approving lease and pledging Lowit. We had a council introduction on August 28th. This is up for adoption also. Mr. Zager?
Actually, Jim's here, but I had a couple of questions asked of me earlier, and I wanted to address those first, and Jim can flesh it out if my explanation's not detailed enough. The first had to do with the opportunity for these bonds to be redeemed in the future. That's pretty standard language to give flexibility to those people who will hold our positions in the future in case the bond rates would go down or some other advantageous circumstances would arise that would make redeeming these bonds, in essence, paying them off and then rolling them into something else. I was asked if it could be possibly added that it be done at no cost. That's generally not how we tie the hands in the future, because any redemption of any bonds and any refinancing is going to incur some costs, and those are the cost of issuances that will be determined to be either prudent or not by both the entities doing it as well as this body in the future. So I think that addresses it, but if there's other questions, Jim's here and is able to go into much more detail.
That question was from me, naturally. But I just wondered if we do redeem them, it's not likely that we will in the present environment, but if we did, sometimes it's written in that if these bonds are redeemed, there's a redemption penalty, and it specifies what that penalty is. It's generally not a lot of money, but it's an inducement for people to redeem them is really what it is.
Typically, when an investor buys bonds, they want to know that their investment is locked in for a certain amount of time. Typical would be 10 years. There are bonds that have shorter periods of time than that. What then happens is, typically now in the market, the bonds can be redeemed at par with no prepayment penalty on X number of days' notice. Some of them 7 days, some of them 30 days or 60 days. There are those bond issues. It's not that common anymore where you have an optional redemption starting at like 103%, and then it goes down to 4, 3, 2, 1 until you get to par in the 5th year. But typically with the bonds for Westfield, they've been optionally redeemable at par on a short notice. And the only reason you would optionally redeem them is if you're going to have a savings, including any of your costs of coming up with the funds to repay those bonds early.
There'd have to be a change in interest rates for that to happen.
And there's been over the last 8 years, there's been a slew of refundings of bonds that were issued prior to 08 because the interest rates have been so low. But you and I don't have a crystal ball, but I doubt that rates are going to be this low in 10 years.
Okay.
Council members
Excuse
have
me.
any other questions?
I have a couple.
I had one other question I wanted to address that was brought to me, and this had to do with Section 5 and was the authorization of actions. The language in this ordinance allows any employee to sign the documents necessary to deliver any contract agreement certificate. It's pretty boilerplate language, and it's designed primarily for those in the execution of the documents at some point later, so that we're not trying to run down and find people at the last minute. I can think of, I think it was a Christmas Eve, I sat around here waiting for different members of councils to show up and sign documents. This happens. This is a little broader language. It was been requested that maybe streamline it a little bit so that it has to be the clerk treasurer, the mayor, or a council member, or their designee. And I think we kind of got the same language, but Jim, is there any reason why it could not be changed to reflect?
We could contract the universe of people that can sign to the mayor and the clerk treasurer and a member of the council, if the council so desires.
Or their designate, perhaps? Would that be acceptable
Certainly,
to
I was the
everybody?
one that brought this up, and it was just
So I'm
that I
trying to
was,
hide this from you.
it was just that I was hoping that we would know who's actually got the authority to sign these documents specifically, and have it at least be authorized by either mayor, us, or the clerk in doing so.
And I understand, the language doesn't say that, but the way we do business would require that, because the person signing it certainly isn't going to be somebody who's, you know, working in the engineering department, never heard of a bond. It's going to have to be somebody that is responsible enough and knows what they're doing. Who that might be is why this is written so broadly, but it can be rifled down. If that's what you'd like Jim to do, I just request that you, if there's a motion to approve with the amendment to Section 5, and we'll state city council, mayor's office, clerk treasurer, or their designee. Is that broad enough?
Yes.
Acceptable?
Yes.
And I apologize I didn't get to you this weekend.
Can I ask a very basic thing, just so it's on the public record? With this deal, we're pledging Lowit, but we do still have the option to use other revenue sources, correct?
Correct.
And we're never restricted in that regard, and so when TIF revenue becomes available, then the goal would be to then switch it out and not have it be Lowit backed.
That is correct. You have the option, but you are not required to use other legally available revenues, which would include TIF increment.
Great, thank you.
And just one additional follow-up to Councilor Edwards' question. At the time these bonds are sold, the optional redemption provisions will be determined at that time. So we will know when these bonds are being sold that, you know, we can optionally redeem them after X amount of time, when X amount of days' notice at par.
Could this affect the rate then somehow?
It affects your universe of investors, and the bond underwriter knows the market, and they usually recommend what is going to get the best rate.
So you would say an investor of my age might wish for there to be a redemption clause in there then?
We're about the same
You didn't
age.
say that, I know.
We're about the same age.
I thought that.
I remember in the 80s when bonds were going to 14% tax exempt, and when the 10-year roll-off ended, people were weeping in the streets when they were taken out of those bonds and replaced with bonds at about 6%.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Keen?
No, two things. We're actually redeeming bonds and issuing new bonds with a different revenue source. Is that correct? Am I correct with that?
Partially. The financing for Grand Park was done on temporary basis with bond anticipation notes in 2011, 12. Those have been taken out and converted to long-term debt. Now the 2013 ban, which comes due April 1 of 2018, needs to be refinanced on a long-term basis. State law doesn't allow a bond anticipation note to be any longer than 5 years.
Okay.
So, and that bond anticipation note was payable from a pledge of COIT, which is now Lowit. And so these bonds will be payable legally solely from a pledge of Lowit, but the bond documents and the ordinance and the lease documents have the provision in there that the RDA can use any other legally available funds to make payments on the bonds in lieu of using Lowit, which, and the goal of the city, I know, is to, when TIF increment is sufficient, to start using TIF and to decrease and eventually totally roll that Lowit pledge off.
Okay. The language reads not great, not to exceed, the interest rate not to exceed 5%, but my memory from the last meeting was you're really anticipating a rate of about 3.5 not 5%. It'll all depend upon the day you sell and the market conditions, obviously, but still, we're talking about a savings of about 1/3 of what our present payments are. Because our present payments are at about a 5% interest rate.
Well, your bond anticipation note, because it was a short-term financing, is at 2.51%. The reason that we're going through these proceedings at this time is if we have the advantage to lock in a forward commitment and lock in a fixed interest rate ahead of next spring when the bonds become due, we can do so. The interest rate market now, because these are going to be up to 25-year bonds, you're not going to get the same rate as you do for 5-year money. We want to be in a position to lock in a forward rate lock if we can, but we don't want to issue the bonds yet because we'd be taking out 2.1% money with 3.5% money. So we're going to wait until it's legally required that we go ahead and pay those bonds off.
Unless you see interest rates potentially spiking.
Yeah, and that's the reason for having the bond ordinance passed now, having the RDA and the RDC make their approvals now, because all those approvals would be necessary to enter into a forward rate lock.
Any other questions from Mr. Crawford? Or Brian? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to approve ordinance 1729, approving lease and pledging Lowit. Oh, yeah, with the provision that Article 5,
Section
5 is modified as we've discussed previously, paring down the list of authorized signatories.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Bob Horke and a second by Joe Edwards. Is there any further council discussion? Hearing none, will the clerk call the roll, please?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Moving on to new business. Ordinance 17-27, 100% voluntary annexation, Chatham Hills, Phase 12. This will require a public hearing tonight. And I take it, Mr. Skelton?
Members of the council, Matt Skelton, Economic and Community Development Department. This evening before you is an annexation ordinance that would incorporate the identified parcel on the screen into Chatham Hills. Again, this is a normal requirement for us before they are able to secondary plat any of this area. We typically would require it to be annexed before that happens. So that's what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Skelton before I open the public hearing? Okay, hearing none, I'll open the public hearing at 7:26 p.m. Do we have any cards?
I do not.
Would anybody care to speak to this item on the agenda, ordinance 1727, before I close the public hearing? All right, hearing none, I'll close the public hearing at 7:27. Thank you. This will come back to us and be up for adoption consideration October 9. Ordinance 17-28, amending traffic regulations of the city of Westfield. Mr. Lawler.
Good evening, councilors. For the record, I'm Jeremy Lawler, Director of Public Works. Before you tonight for introduction is ordinance 17-28, amending traffic regulations of the city of Westfield. This is our standard annual, sometimes semi-annual traffic ordinance amendment or update that incorporates all of our new roads as our standard practice. So anything private development or capital project gets amended in. Additionally, and per the request of the associated neighborhoods, there are some stop control intersection changes as a part of this ordinance as well. And then additionally, various 8 in total speed limit changes. These are all roads that have been evaluated by our engineering department, as well as consultations with the police department. And we are recommending speed limits, either reduction or increase in a few parts around the town. So with that, I would entertain any questions you may have.
Counselors, any questions? Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. This is a council introduction, so you'll be back September 25th. Ordinance 17-31, Custom Commerce Park PUD Amendment. Dane?
Good evening, members of the council. For the record, Dane Crabtree with the Economic and Community Development Department. The item before you is Ordinance 17-31, a proposed amendment to the Custom Commerce Park PUD specific to Lot 5, which is located on the east side of Oak Ridge Road between State Road 32 and 169th Street. Lot 5 exists between the Weiss Engineering Building to the north and the Thieneman Building to the south. The current PUD ordinance lists self-storage as a permitted use, but restricts the use from abutting Oak Ridge Road. The proposed amendment would allow a self-storage facility to abut Oak Ridge Road and would add EFS as a permitted exterior building material in addition to masonry materials. The proposed amendment and use has been approved by Tim Carr, Chairman of the Development Control Committee of Custom Commerce Park. This ordinance is scheduled for a public hearing at the October 2nd Advisory Plan Commission meeting and will return to you in the future for adoption consideration. Clint Patterson of Sterling Development and Brad Schrage of American Structure Point are here to briefly present on behalf of the proposed PUD. Thank you.
Thank you, Dane.
Good evening, Brad Schrage with American Structure Point. Offices at 7260 Shadeland Station. Thank you for taking the time tonight. Just very briefly, as Dane mentioned, the two reasons for this PUD amendment are to allow the self-storage use to abut Oak Ridge Road, and then also to allow EFS as a facade material. The remaining buildings within the development allowed EFS as a facade material, and at the request of the overall developer, they wanted the buildings to match out there. The ordinance change to the UDO actually would not allow. They were allowed previously. The ordinance change would no longer allow EFS as a facade material. So that we're just trying to match what is already out there. And happy to answer any questions or you may have.
Thank you. Council, any questions for the petitioner?
Is EFS actually desired on the bottom floor or just the second and higher floors?
It would be all areas of the facade.
That's typically a problem. That's one of the reasons we took it out, is we'd prefer to not have that on the first story. That's why I was asking if it was possible to restrict that to the second and above. I'll just have that comment. Thank you.
Please state your name and address.
Clint Patterson, 3900 Edison Lakes Parkway, Suite 201, Mishawaka, Indiana. I'm with Sterling Development. It was actually proposed by the Carr family to have a solid look across there, because we would also prefer a masonry type, first level, or at least a wainscoting up 4 foot or so. But because of the look, it took away from looking, I guess, identical to the rest of what is in there. And so that was on their preference. And I would assume that we will build around that. You're not going to have parking, and it'll be landscaped. It won't be grassed up to the side where lawnmowers could hit it or anything like that that would tear up that material. So we are, I guess, cautious and aware of that, just trying to meet, his standards as well as fitting in the park. So I did want to bring that up. Thank you.
How many storage units would be in this development?
I think it's 514 total between the multi-level and the single-level non-climate on the back.
So would this be both for residential and commercial purposes?
Primarily residential. That's really what we're suited to, and there's a need in this area, we've identified that, and then, so yes, residential is really who we're tailored to.
Anyone else? All right, we'll move it on to APC. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is Oak Manor PUD amendment to Lancashire. I would like to, are we going to present?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I'll introduce.
Well, I'd just like to say
Go ahead.
that this is back before us because there was there was some last-minute changes in language, and there was an error in the PUD that we approved. Although it was our intent, it doesn't change the PUD that was presented and voted on in any substantial way, but we do have to correct an error, and we want to be transparent about that. So, Matt?
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add, really. This is the Oak Manor PUD it's really the same thing that was just in front of you. There was just an error that the developer discovered after it went through the whole process, and we, in an effort to be fully transparent, we just decided it was best to go through the whole process again. I know that some folks may not have been happy with that, but that's life. So the developer is here if you want a brief summary. If you don't think that's warranted, then I don't know that he has a compelling desire to speak, but he will if you would like to talk to him.
All right, well, we need to pass this on to AP. It needs to go to APC, and then they'll come back to us. Are there any questions?
This related to square footage, didn't it?
Correct, correct. Any other questions? All right. We'll move on to ordinance 17-34, the 2018 budget. Mr. Bertrand.
Members of council, I will be joined this evening by Mrs. Tammy Havers. She pulls up the presentation. As you know, it's this time of year where we present to you a draft budget proposal. The timeline for the budget is reflected in our slide 2. This format to achieve consistency is the same format that you have, you are used to. We start this process in May with each department, each business unit, and I won't go through this step by step, but tonight, actually it's September 11th, we introduce this budget to you. And Tammy and I are going to co-present, and before I go any further, I just want to publicly recognize her, John Rogers, and all the directors. It is a challenge, to say the least, to bring in a budget that is fiscally responsible, yet meets the demands of a growing community, not the least of which is driven by the expectation of the quality of life that we have here. And I think you're pretty well used to some of these, this is an iterative process, and that as we advertise through the budget process set forth by the state, it will be advertised at a higher rate. They'll do, the Department of Local Government Finance will do their review after you adopt this budget. I believe you are working on a public work session here in the next week or so.
That's correct.
With Mr. Greg Garataz, who is our financial advisor, and I know that will be duly publicly noticed. I believe it's going to happen in this chamber. So again, I won't read this word for word, but these are the drivers and benchmarks. Just drop back. These are our corporate goals here that we strive to deliver as an operations unit, and then with that we frame the budget around those elements. Clearly, safety is number one. Improving our infrastructure, streets, trails, and other public spaces, and reflective and responsive to the growth of our community. And you'll see some slides here in the next panels, what that looks like. And we have to react to what the DLGF also presents to us. And a stable tax rate, and history will prove that that's been our benchmark of success. Here's a driver to revenues, as you well know. This is an estimated completion of 2017, but everything prior to that is historical. In fact, filings, and we see this upward trajectory. So clearly people, both residential and non-residential, want to be in Westfield. AV is strong, counselors. This is the real number as you walk across the bottom there. Since 2014, we're just on the net side, $1.7 billion. Today we're 2.4 gross and net. You can see net assessed as a total after minus any deductions, and we get property tax appeals probably monthly from the assessor's office, both at the 1%, 2%, and 3%. And so we have to react to those. I can tell you that 3%, one business was successful in getting a dramatic reduction in their property tax bill that went back clear to, I believe, 2010. That's when it was retroactive that far back. So the tax appeal process is not favorable to a government unit such as ours, but it's certainly favorable to the taxpayer. It can be. And we work with Brian's partners on sometimes going in and sitting in those appeals with the assessor's office. So that you see we got a strong growth trend here. Public safety, as you know, that's one of our cornerstones. And we include these simply because to show you that it is a highly demanding component of our expense profile. Fire is a large expense and not much revenue. It's just not how it's wired up. It's a piece of critical infrastructure that I know Chief Reed does his level best to try and maximize the dollars that come his way. Police, we can see there again, our calls are on the way up. In 2017 is an estimate. We don't have a good number. Again, it's an estimate, but if you'll note that this year will be the first full year we've had to transition to a different software platform provided by the county. And I'll talk more about that expense. I think some of you already know that that's a pretty extraordinary cost that's escalating very rapidly pursuant to an existing local agreement, interlocal agreement between all the business units, I should say all the county, Noblesville, Fishers, and Carmel sharing that cost. And I will say it's getting nearly untenable, and we're working on that. It's a slide just to give a representation, and by the way, we'll provide this. It is still some work to be done, but we'll certainly get this up on the website, so it's not only for you, but for public view. It's a little slide characterizing what the city gets from a property tax collection standpoint over a home valued at that particular level. And I'll now yield the dais for Tammy to speak on OpenGov. I know the Oversight Committee has some insight on OpenGov, and I want her to spend some time so we can further discuss our financial transparency and accessibility, not only to you, but eventually the public at large.
Before I get into OpenGov, I'll show you the regular presentation that we do that shows the numbers of the revenues and the expenses that we get, and then I'll flip over to OpenGov so that you can see the benefit of looking at it graphically. So for the fire and general fund, you can see that public safety is a major component of our operational budget of the city. So here you can see police and fire, our proportion actually went up in 2018 from 2017. Here's a slide on the revenue estimates for the property tax impacted funds. So tonight we're going to focus on the DLGF funds, the funds that have to go to the state because the state administers some part of the revenue. Some of those are the general fund, which includes police, administration, community and economic development. There's the fire department, and MVH, which is the motor vehicle highway fund, CCD, which is the cumulative capital development fund, public safety building, which is the police and fire station out on Dartown Road, GO bonds for equipment and vehicles. We have the rainy day fund, which we don't levy a property tax for, but we always budget $250,000 just in case something happens. We do not spend from that account. We also have the cumulative capital improvement fund, which we get SIG tax money from the state, from the cigarette sales, and then we apply that there. And then the local road and street fund is another example of a DLGF fund. So right now, as proposed, we have a property tax levy of $20.4 million, and included in that is tax cap loss. And what that is the state has the 1%, 2%, and 3% law that was passed in the Constitution. So when you get your tax bill, you're not getting a tax bill on your total net assessed value as it would normally be given. You actually get a tax break. And so that tax break is represented to us as a loss to the city. So really, out of that 20.4 that is shown on the advertised amount on the Form 3, which is the publication, we only will collect approximately 15.8 million. So that is an artificial number, and we would only collect about 15.8 million off of that. Our local option income tax, formerly the county option income tax, did jump up last year, so now it is at 12 million. And then we have other miscellaneous revenues such as food and beverage, building permits, excise taxes, the SIG tax that I mentioned, motor vehicle highway distributions, local road and street distributions, and also ambulance fees that go to the fire fund. So all in total, we have about $36 million estimated in revenue for the 2018 budget. Doing a comparison of revenues to expenses, we are close on our revenues and expenses without the tax cap. So again, those are the real budgets, right? So we can really spend this much and we really will get approximately this much. The numbers at the bottom are how the forms are presented to the public. So when you go on Gateway, which is the state transparency portal, when you go to that site, you will see those 40 numbers. I have noted on there which forms add up to which numbers. It's super confusing for everyone. So hopefully this will help you to get that in perspective. The expense detail, there's a separate budget this year that shows tax cap loss. And so that's broken out a little bit more, but it's still in there. The Form 2 is the miscellaneous revenues, so those are our estimates. Again, we are estimating our expenses for the authority to spend those, and so we try to estimate those over kind of what we need, just so that we are covered. And then on the revenue side, we try to estimate those a little bit lower than what we expect to get in, because we don't want to count on something and then have it not come in and then us not be able to meet our budget. And then the Form 3 that I mentioned is the notice to taxpayers, and then that's where it shows your budget, your levy, and then it will show the previous year levy. One note on the notice to taxpayers, which is on the agenda item linked on there, it has an excess levy appeal of $500,000, and that is a placeholder. We hope to get the automatic special legislation growth appeal, but if that does not work, then we can go to the state and ask for annexation appeals and fill out the paperwork and go through that process. So again, this is the advertised rate, so this is the max that we are allowed to receive in levy, and then the max amount that we would have for our budget. You can still cut them after we get our certified budget in January or February when we get our budget order. Here are the department expense changes from 2017 to 2018. You'll see our budget in the general fund, which is the left-hand side on the green, went from 19.2 to 20.1, and Todd will talk about some of those changes. And then our other funds, you'll notice that our expenses went from 13.9 to 16.1. And you can see that we have a new GEO bond on there, which is the 2017 bond number 6. That will be presented at the next meeting. And that one, again, is a placeholder. We don't have a amortization schedule yet. So this would just set the max amount, and then it could come in under that. Note that these expenses are what we are proposing to spend, and it does not include the property tax cap amount that you will again see in those gateway forms. Our cap amount did go up from 4.224 estimate to an estimate of $4.615 million. So let me go over to OpenGov and show you this information in a graphical form. We will make this tool available to the city council members. After this meeting, we will schedule a training. There are several members that are on the oversight committee who have already seen and have logins to this. And we will make sure that all the other council members have this as a tool. So here is an example of the projected sources of revenue for the DLGF funds. So here you can see that taxes make up 90% of the revenue for these DLGF funds, the ones that we just spoke about. And then if you want to know what kind of taxes make up that amount, you can click on it, and then you'll see that property tax makes up 48% of that. Our COIT is 12 million, which is 37%, and then you can see the other revenues that make that up. If you like the chart view, you can scroll down and you can see the numbers down there. Here are the projected uses for the DLGF funds. You can see that personnel makes up 57% and services make up 21%. Focusing just on the general and fire funds, our operating funds, you can see again that personnel is the majority of the expenses. And then property taxes make up 88% and fees are at 2.8 million. Which departments are supported by the general and fire funds? You can see it broken out here. And again, you can see police and fire make up a majority of the general and fire fund budgets. The projected fire expenses, so while we're in this department, say you want to learn more about the fire department, you can click into the fire department and then look at the expense type, and then you can again see that personnel is 90% of the fire expenses. And then you can drill down once more and you can say, look at the services. And then here's where you can see that dispatch services are a portion of the services of the fire department. You can look at the same thing with the police department and then see the breakdown underneath of what's making up those numbers. So that's a tool that you guys will have available for this budget season. As Todd mentioned, the budget workshop will be held, and we'll get into the details of not only the DLGF funds, but also the TIF funds and some of the other funds that the city has, like the Emergency Medical Services Fund. There's a law enforcement fund and many other funds that the city has. So you guys will get an exposure to all of that and be able to ask questions in depth We'll have the sustainability plan available at that time, same as last year, and we'll be able to go through that and make any modifications or answer any questions that you have. The budget public hearing will be the following Monday on the 25th, and then we'll have the adoption consideration on October 9th. So I'm going to turn it back over to Todd now.
Tammy, before you
Yes.
leave, Jim and Cindy and I have logged in on this, but the rest of them haven't been able to. Will they have some training
Yes,
on this?
I'll send an email to everybody, and then we'll see if we can schedule some trainings for everyone to be able to get hands-on experience in there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. So, part of those expenses, and we wanted to call those out, kind of explode those from the expense column. We have modeled this budget at a 2% increase across the board. You know, one driver that we are still trying to get our hands on, and I had a very productive meeting today with our insurance agent. Health insurance costs are not unlike really any other employer in today's environment. And if you recall, we were with Advantage for several years, probably I'd say 8 years, Advantage Health Solutions. And we had to change because they no longer provided that level or that product line. So we went to Anthem, we bid it out. Anthem was the successful bidder. And what we have found over the last 2 renewal cycles is we were artificially underpriced, which would beg the question of why did Advantage cease to exist. So in the last few years, we've endured some pretty significant increases in the health insurance column. And so what we've done, we did a 6-month renewal that gets us through the mid part of 2018. But today, very encouraging news from our agent that we have, it looks like we'll get a low double-digit increase, not the 40 that's modeled here. And we'll make those adjustments, and we're going to make some more do some more plan redesign, as increasing deductibles to a higher level, and switching into I want to lose the term here, but a formulary drug list that is not as broad. I'll go to an essential formulary, I think is what it's called. So that'll narrow, and when I say narrow, I can't tell you from what the inventory is, but it equates to, when we make that change immediately, it's a 3.6% reduction in our existing costs. So obviously we have to do that. The other thing that we're exploring in this particular component of human capital is a wellness clinic with Riverview Hospital. We've been able to since Riverview is obviously opening an operation here in our own city, we are going to partner with Hamilton County and try to create scale and open up or participate in a health clinic, and I believe the school corporation is going to partner in that as well. So we'll be able to expand the hours, and that tends to be a lower cost of health care consumption. But we're in early details of that, so I'm just making you aware that we're not just sitting back lethargic to these. We're trying to react and be proactive at the same time. So you'll see on the right-hand table there that, as noted earlier, our community is growing, requiring us to bring on 2 more police officers. If Chief Rush were here, he's actually doing some crime fighting this evening. He let me know that. And so oftentimes his department, his patrol division, is running with 4 people on the street, and that is all too often an unsafe situation, not only for officers, but can be for our community. The fire department has activated a mechanic. We believe there's going to be some internal cost savings and cost avoidance that we'll be able to recoup those costs associated with that full-time employee. It's noted by Chief Reed that if we don't see those within a reasonable period of time, that we would go to the outsourced model. But I can assure you, personal experience, outsourcing mechanic services on your fire fleet can get very, very expensive. So we're going to try this for a period of time and see if we can make it work and realize some cost savings. We have some costs that were eliminated, and then we've added those back in the form of digital marketing coordinator. These aren't necessarily all 100% new costs, but we're just letting you know that of the costs that are associated with full-time employees. And the same is true with Public Works Administrator. We've had some retirement earlier this year, late last year, so it's not all full 75. And we can 75,000, but we will in our workshop explode those out, the credits and debits, if you will. Any questions on this before I move along? Okay. Operational expenses outside of full-time employees, our human capital. We always get a nice notification from our friends at Duke Energy that they're never going to lower our bills, they're always going to raise them. So we have to model those in here. And then on your right-hand side, the number one bullet there, I mentioned it earlier, it's an interlocal agreement between the 4 cities and the county. This is an area that when we first started this, if you'll recall, our initial expense with the consolidated dispatch services was about $400,000, a little over. We received our notification pursuant to the interlocal agreement that the 2018 expense to this city is $1 million and change. It's not 1.2, but it's a little over $1 million. And it is just, I can assure you, it is a topic among the mayors and the county commissioners. This interlocal agreement, I think, stays intact for another year, and there is a concerted effort to try to reformulate this to where it's a bit more equitable. Our bill is as much as the city of Fishers, and they have 80,000 population, and we have 38,000. So there's clearly an inequity that we've been, Mayor Cook has been trying to fight this fight with his peers, and to no avail. I mean, as recently as 2 months ago, a discussion was for the 2018 budget to reformulate this, and they all agreed no. So we were outnumbered. So we are taking measures and steps to internally in the way we track our calls, to try to mitigate some of that cost. But this is an extraordinary cost. One might even argue that we're under maybe a double taxation environment. I know that the mayor of the city of Kokomo fought that fight a few years ago and was successful. We've been trying to fight that fight as well, and it has not been successful. The landscaping contract is an additional add. In the existing contract we have, please know that we expanded the scope of service for what is now Brightview. They are under contract. They do perform litter control along US 31. Again, with all other expenses, we're looking to maybe modify and bring that number down. But that's we outsource that service for janitorial in all of our parks. All the trash pickup, all the playgrounds, all of our parkland is kept by Brightview on our behalf. We have a public works supervisor that manages that contract. And then we've centralized non-public safety fleet at Public Works and all the other departments throughout the city, with the exception of police and fire. And with the fire mechanic, we are looking at taking just basic preventative maintenance and doing that in-house with the fire department. And so we're test running that, and we'll see how that works out from a cost perspective. Any questions on that slide? Any questions on the question slide?
I have a couple, since I won't be here for either the
Yes,
work
sir.
session or the next meeting. My rough calculations were it's about an 11% increase in assessed value over last year, net AV.
Back that up. Amy says 9.95, and I wouldn't argue with her.
I won't either because I did it in my head. So everything kind of 2.5, 257 to 452, 2.25, 2.25, yeah, almost 10%. So everything's based upon that, and is that, are your assumptions in this budget that our tax rate remains the same and all the other taxing entities remain the same at this point in time, just for budgetary purposes?
Yeah, I would expect, obviously, as you know, we'll advertise high and expect it to come down. So we have, for the largest portion of this decade that we're leaning into as being a city, we have been within 75, 78 cents, 100, and we're 78 and change right now. So I would expect that's where we would land in that same neighborhood of the mid-70s on our municipal tax rate.
So for the tax rate, we are adding, it will go before you guys in the next council meeting, which is a new GO bond. So there is a chance that our tax rate will increase slightly. 82 cents would be the high end of that. And so it will be somewhere between our 79 cents and that, because we are looking to add that. The net assessed value increase is helpful, but most of our tax base is residential, and so we go off of the gross AV to get the 1%, and that's where the big tax caps come in, so.
Okay, last year, the legislature gave us an exemption, a growth exemption. We were allowed a higher number. Did we get that same exemption for this year, or are we back to the old?
This is where we are hoping that we get it, but the state always has the ultimate decision in what they do. So we, again, hope that we get it and that they apply the legislation the same. They can interpret it differently. So it's never an absolute that we will get it, but nothing has changed to where we shouldn't get it.
So this is a DLGF decision, it's where this ends up being?
Yes.
So statutory, there's a statutory allowance for that, it's just a matter of whether they want to grant it or not?
Exactly.
Okay. Final question, if we're holding our tax rate basically the same or going up slightly and other taxing entities hold their rate or it drops their rate, it changes the proportions on the tax cap impact, and therefore we would get a higher revenue source, is that not correct?
Our tax cap, because our percentage will go up, our percentage of the tax cap will also go up. So that's where you saw in the budget slide that we are increasing our tax cap impact.
But everybody's tax cap went up. What I'm saying is if our rate is the same or up 1 or 2 cents, and let's say the schools drop theirs by 10 cents, the proportion of tax cap hit changes and the city ends up gaining money in a situation like that. And I'm just wondering if that is taken into account in these budget figures, or if that's just one of those unknown things we'll adjust along the way, once we know all the rates.
The latter is the most accurate statement.
Okay.
We never really know until we get our 1782 notice.
Okay.
That typically happens in the first few weeks of the new year. Other questions by council?
No other questions?
Again, this is an introduction. We'll have a budget workshop noticed here in the next, whenever you can form for that and required, and we'll be prepared.
Can you put the PowerPoint presentation online too, so we can access that? Thank you.
Good. Very good. Thank you, Todd and Tammy. At this time, residents who wish to address the council on items not on the agenda may do so at this time. Anybody like to talk to council? Sir? Please state your name and address.
Jim Thurston, 755 Racetime Road, Westfield. Just wanted to clarify, I had seen a post by Councilwoman Spoljaric, excuse me if I got your name wrong, on the deal with the on the deal with the Colts. What you posted, and maybe Todd, this is a better question for Mr. Burton, is that the extent of the deals? There's nothing else like paying for hotel costs or anything like that that exists that weren't disclosed publicly? Is that the extent of the deal? I mean, that's really my question.
Let me answer that, and then Todd, do you want to address that?
Yeah, on the deal with the Colts, I was just, trying to make sure that, what has been disclosed in terms of what the city is compensating for. I'll be frank, I am a season ticket holder, but I'm also a little surprised about the good deal. So there's a question and then also a commending for the deal, if it's what I understand. There's no like subsidizing the hotel costs, no food or transportation or anything like that that's involved in that deal.
No, so the hotel and the Colts worked out the pricing structure between themselves. We are named party in that, but we have agreed to not disclose their numbers between the two of them because it's proprietary pricing.
Okay, but we are not subsidizing anything else. In fact, we're
I can
net.
say that I'll tell you this, that Hamilton County Tourism was a partner in that.
Okay. Okay. Hamilton County Tourism. Okay, thank you. Well, and then I must, in sincerity, commend you for the deal because I was a little bit surprised given that, the NFL has taken money from the Department of Defense for standing for the national anthem. So I commend us for the deal. On the matter of the facility itself, I must say I'm a little bit concerned about the potential that this could be converted into an income tax. I was very heartened coming in here and hearing, again, Councilwoman Spoljaric's comments about the TIF money and being able to go back to that. I would just strongly encourage the council to consider maintaining that. In my career, I've looked at over billions of dollars of real estate, and when I look at the original deal, and I've just recently moved here, so I've missed some of these, the ability to hear some of the past discussions on this, so I realize I'm retrading past ground, but when I pencil out the deal of, the original 25-year lease, it's like a 5%, 5.5% IRR, and I just don't know who would enter in that deal with. So to me, as somebody who's trained in looking at these things, it looks to me like this was the intent all along. And so, I just encourage the council to continue to look for other ways other than income tax, particularly TIF revenue, to make sure that that's what covers the cost of this obligation and not dipping into income tax. When we talk about the council is supposed to keep taxes low and provide for needs, I do not see this as being a need for this city. So I thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else? All right. At this time, I entertain council comments. Mr. A.P. Cindy?
I just have a quick one. I have been on social media and been following a lot of the comments having to do with the 161st and the Monon. And as everybody knows, there's been some issues there, longstanding. Make a long story short, I said I would bring this up, but once the new signage went up, it seems there's been more problems in some people's eyes rather than less. So I don't know what we need to do about that as a city, but I just wanted to bring it up here to say I think we have a problem. We have people that aren't following the rules, so I don't know if we need to do a better job at education or switch out those signs, but one or the other, I think we need to do something. Thanks.
I'd just like to make a comment that the safety forces in this community are working on that, and they're meeting and discussing that. Jeremy was here, and I know they've been in meetings concerning that, and the ultimate solution is the tunnel under, but that's a ways away, so. And if anybody has any suggestions, feel free to write Cindy, myself, or any council members on how they see that.
We have, just to elaborate on that a little bit, there have been meetings to discuss that, and there are some, I think, ways that it can be improved. And those are being looked at now, and hopefully you'll see some changes in the short term to try to address some of those issues. But I agree with Cindy, it is not clear to our either the trail users or the street users what is supposed to be happening there. So we're going to try to make that clear through any method that we can.
All right, thank you. All right. You have a report from APC, Steve?
I do. APC met last Tuesday evening because of the holiday. We acted on Lancashire at Oak Manor. The development plan and site plan were approved. There was a public hearing with no comment on the Bridgewater PUD that we acted on tonight, the Radrick building signage, so that was sent with a positive recommendation. And we also had also sent the Chatham Hills PUD Amendment 4 with a positive recommendation to this council. The only other item on our agenda was a public hearing for Bridgewater PUD amendment for the Oak Hollow development that's being proposed at 151st Street and Cary Road, the northwest corner. So there was a public hearing held there, and the APC will possibly take action at our next meeting on that if the developer is ready. And that was it.
Thank you, Steve. Any other comments from the council? I have a few. This past week, we experienced Voices from the Past. It's an annual program, and it's well-attended this year, thanks to Melody and her staff, Parks. They put on a tremendous program, and it involved some of our school children, and it was quite active here on Friday afternoon and Friday morning with people attending that and learning a little bit about the Westfield history. And we do have quite a history and quite a story to tell. It's different each year. There's little vignettes with actors, and they change characters, and it's fresh. You did a great job, Melody. Thank you, and thank your staff for me. We also held a safety festival, the Greyhound Pass, this past Saturday, and I want to remind everybody that the firemen, our safety forces, were out there, and they were collecting food for the Hurricane Harvey relief. We are still doing that. Our police, fire stations, and also our customer service center on 171st. So any of you that would like to contribute and donate to this cause, feel free to stop by our fire stations. No? Uh-oh. The schools are doing that. Not safe, not fire, and yeah, okay, all right. I'm sorry, I was misinformed on that. Thank you for setting the record straight. Okay, so I guess you can go to the schools and drop off things. There's a great need there. We certainly are excited about the Colts announcement coming to Grand Park, and maybe not as excited as we would have been if they had victory on Saturday or Sunday. But anyway, that's great for our city. We are moving dirt up at 191st Street for the Marriott up there at that intersection. So that's progressing, and I'm sure that we may have some other information about other projects coming forward on the heels of the announcement of the Colts training camp here. So I'd like to congratulate William Knox, who's our in charge of Grand Park. Thank you, William, for your effort. Todd Bertrand, he spent a lot of time in making this happen. Andy and Council for bringing them here and making this a reality. Good job, everybody. Let's see. Tomorrow there'll be a ribbon cutting, another project that we've been working on. The West Access Road is now complete, and it's a marvelous engineering feat. Thank you, Jeremy, and your staff for making that happen and completing it. Once we got the land acquisition moved fairly fast, and that road is now complete. If you haven't driven it, it's really a nice addition. There'll be a ribbon cutting there at 10 tomorrow. It opened on Friday. Let's see. And the last thing I wanted to announce is that we are also looking regionally at participating in the proposal. As you know, Amazon headquarters is they're looking for a second headquarters, and as they look for a site that will be engaged with in that regional effort. So we'll see what happens there. Mayor is not here. Todd, do you have any other comments on behalf of the administration? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye. 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 We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Yes, yes, we're good. Yes.